Good evening. Give a time. Boker Boulder. Welcome to Friends of Israel around the world and around the United States. We know a lot of people are deeply concerned about in colleagues in Surfside, Florida, and so we all send our thoughts and our prayers out to anybody in harm's way. We know that the IDF and a group of reservists are on their way to be a part of the rescue team, and we will very much keep all those people in our thoughts today. Today we go to our virtual tour series. We're so grateful to be in summer, to be getting outdoors a little bit. I know it's quite hot in some places, including the one we're about to visit in Tzippori. We'll hear from Reuven. Now that we have everybody here, we'd love to know how hot it is where you are. Is this hiking weather in your backyard? Whether it is or isn't, we bring you our virtual tour series here with Reuven Solomon. My name's Firestone, and I know exactly where Reuven is located today. He's right here on the screen with me in our virtual studio. We're going to go on an amazing tour now to see Tzippori. So tell us a little bit about how hot is it, Reuven, where you are in the Galilee?
Shalom, Wayne, and shalom to all our friends of the AIFL. So today we're actually going to be doing our tour, a virtual tour from Jerusalem, if you like, to Tzippori in the Galilee. Tzippori, the ornament of all of the Galilee. That's the way it's referred to. And in the Jewish literature, and Josephus also calls it the jewel of the Galilee. Tzippori actually has its beginnings as a post first temple period city in the Maccabean, the Hasmonean period, where the Hasmoneans for the first time settle in this newly called city that eventually becomes the absolute capital of the Galilee. The Romans very quickly succeed the Hasmoneans in 63 BC, Pompeii, and Roman rule begins, and Tzippori falls to the Romans for a brief, that's in 63 BC. For a very brief interlude, the Parthians in around 55 BC take Tzippori from the Romans, and Herod the Great, who else, conquers it as the upcoming king of the Roman appointed king of the Roman province of Judea, conquers Tzippori in a snowstorm. And this is where really we begin our story of the archaeology and the development of Tzippori, because Tzippori becomes very quickly Herod the Great's capital in the Galilee. Remember that Tiberius doesn't exist. It's his son, Herod Antipas, that eventually builds Tiberius in honor of the emperor. But Tzippori is spelt in many different ways, as you have seen. You can spell it with a TZ, you can spell it just with the Z, or you can spell it as it's spelt on the map here, Sepphoris, which is the sort of anglicized name of, or Romanized name of Tzippori. But Tzippori, the name actually comes from the bird. Tzippor is a bird in Hebrew. And Tzippori is sort of like birdie or my bird. And our Talmudic sources tell us that it was called such because Tzippori, the town, sits on top of a hill like a bird. Tzippori becomes a very multicultural city. As I said, Herod the Great conquers it and makes it his capital, but further down the line, it's settled in the Christian period by some Christians down below. Roman pagans dwell there, Jews dwell there, and actually in the time of heading towards the Great Revolt, the Great War, Tzippori has a majority Jewish population. You may remember that Yosef ben Matityahu, Josephus, appointed the governor of the Galilee, wanted to make his headquarters in Tzippori, but the residents there would not have it, and he wasn't able to force his way. So he, as governor of the Galilee, makes his way to Yotfat and establishes that as his fortress in the Jewish war against the Romans. This may have had a big part in what happens next, because the Jewish war against the Romans that begins then in 65, 66 CE is very brutal. Yotvat is very quickly overcome, and in Tzippori, they can probably hear the slaughter and the noise of the war, and they see what's going on around them, and they take advantage of the Roman declaration that whoever opens their gates and does not resist the Romans will not be destroyed. And Tzippori throws open her gates and does not join the revolt. This explains how Tzippori manages to survive the destruction, along with some other Galilee villages that did not participate in the Great Revolt. Tzippori continues to develop in a multicultural way, with Jewish residents in the majority, pagan Romans, and as I said, in the early Christian period, some Judeo-Christians, and in the later Christian period, the beginnings of the Byzantine period, Christians living alongside part of Tzippori. So it's this multicultural city that actually becomes the refuge after the failed Bar Kokhba revolt for many Jews in the Galilee who come and settle in Tzippori after Hadrian puts down the Great Revolt. Hadrian then, of course, renames Tzippori to Dio Caesarea for Zeus and for the Caesar. And I did not tell you that the one who actually rebuilds Tzippori after the destruction after Herod the Great was his son, who also then builds Tiberias. And Tiberias becomes the capital of the Galilee, but Tzippori remains the ornament of all of the Galilee. In Tzippori, there is a belief that there were two residents who came from Jerusalem and took up residence in Tzippori in the 1st century, and we're talking about Anna and Joachim, the parents of Mary. It is believed that Mary, as a young lady, was brought up in Tzippori, and we'll talk about this later. But first, I want to take you up on the rooftop of the fortress and give you a quick look around where you are looking now at the red roof down below you on the middle of this, or slightly right of the screen. That red roof actually is the Crusader site and the Christian site, earlier Christian site. You're looking across the Jewish development right on the top of Tzippori, the Jewish township, right on the top of Tzippori, the majority of the township. And as we sweep around, once again, you're looking at the red roof of the monastery that is below Tzippori, and the Jewish quarter stretched in front of you. The hills around are the valley of Natufa, the Natufa Valley, and we're going to take a quick skip around the roof to show you some of the views that one can see from here. You can actually look across now and see the water reservoirs of the Israel Water Project that brings water from the Sea of Galilee and pumps it all the way through Israel. And as we make our way around on this rooftop, you're getting some of the views that one can see from this highest point of Tzippori. That was the Jewish neighborhood. You're looking down at the archaeology of some of the ruins. We're actually standing on a Crusader rooftop tower that later on, of course, in the Muslim period becomes a school. But this Crusader tower was built on top of the highest spot of Tzippori, which was the Jewish quarter. Across the valley, you just saw Nazareth, the town of Nazareth. And this brings me back to what I was speaking about when I talked about Joachim and Anna, the parents of Mary, who moved to Tzippori. And it is thought that maybe Joseph met Mary at Tzippori because he was a builder's laborer. And in the days where Mary was becoming a young lady, Joseph was probably employed as a builder's laborer in Tzippori. And the theory is that that's where they met. Some people even go as far as to say that Jesus as a youth may have helped Joseph with his work in Tzippori. You're looking across the Natufa Valley, and as I said, the water reservoirs of the Israel water carrier, bringing water all the way from the Galilee. And it's quite a view from the rooftop of Tzippori. We're coming all the way around, and we're going to end up now right back where we started, overviewing the red roofs that is today the Christian monastery below Tzippori, the red roof over there, the Christian monastery below Tzippori, and where the Crusaders also built a church. So you got a view of some of the different neighborhoods of Tzippori, and now I want to take you to specifically into the different quarters and tell you a little bit about what can be seen there. Let me first and foremost tell you that Tzippori has a reputation of being the Mosaic capital of Israel. Some 66 beautiful mosaics have been already noted in Tzippori, and we're always finding more. And most of it, actually it's spread throughout in the Jewish quarter, in the synagogue, and of course, a lot of it in the Roman section of the city that you're overlooking now. What you're looking at is the Decumanus. In all Roman established cities, there was a Roman imprint of a east-west streets and north-south streets, creating the New York grid fashion that some of you are very familiar with in New York. Well, that was a Roman idea, actually. And we're looking at now down one of the east-west streets, the Decumanus of the Roman part of town. And we're now going to proceed to which will bring you right across the Cardo called the main artery because it was the main street running north-south. And that's where we're coming to next with the next slide. We're going to cross the Cardo. Here we are in the Cardo. This is the main street, and you can tell immediately that it's the main street because look at the ruts left by the many chariots and carriages that made their journey here on this main road past the shop fronts. There would have been shop fronts like the Cardo in Jerusalem, shop fronts on both sides, some with roofs. And you can notice right in the front of this slide, a game scratched into the stone where kids probably when the chariots weren't coming past or the carriages weren't coming past would play their dice games in the middle of the road. The next slide will take us to see some of the fabulous mosaics in Tzippori. And this is the Cardo again that you're looking at. As you can see the shop fronts here with some of them with geometric mosaics on the floor. In fact, one of the carvings here in the stone is actually a carving of a menorah. But the next slides will show you some of why Tzippori is called the capital of Israel's mosaics. There are, of course, the more simple geometric designs in mosaics in the public places, in the market square and so on. And in the square that we think was the public area, the market square area, is where we found one of the most beautiful mosaics that I want to talk a little bit about, as you will see very shortly. These are other mosaics that we will skip through as you notice that the Romans in this period used small stones to get a pretty good resolution of their mosaic pictures, but none is as beautiful as the one we're going to see shortly. But before we see that, the next couple of mosaics will give you an indication of the themes that the Romans chose to portray in their mosaics. Here you see a hunting scene, hunters on their horses, another scene that the Romans portray that may be a mistake of some sorts, because these are the Amazons, the Amazonas. And you'll see that the Romans didn't hear about their practice of removing their left breast in order to be able to, their right breast in order to be able to pull the bow and arrow properly. The Romans didn't hear about them, so they portray the Amazonas complete. We're heading now towards after a couple of hunting scenes, again, a hunter, another one, another hunter with the horn of Copernicum, of plenty. And here we have one of the major mosaics of Tzippori. This is called the Nile mosaic because it actually portrays the flooding of the Nile. And you can see as its central point, the Nilometer, which marks the level of the Nile. We have a short video to give you a little bit of more insight into the detail of this Nile mosaic coming up now. But while the video is actually showing, I want to tell you a little bit about the unique way that this mosaic was treated. You know that mosaics usually, when they are renewed, when they are found and renewed, actually because of earthquake and earth movement, are usually buckled up and holes and so on. So what they do is to spread a very thick Elmer's glue-like substance on the face of the mosaic, its ups and downs, its bumps and lumps, and then spread a, of course, flexible material, carpet, thick one, on top of this glue, having the face of the mosaics stuck to this carpet. And then a great large diameter steel barrel rolls up this carpet while the workers cut away from the bottom of the stones of the mosaic, the plaster, rolling this mosaic up on a gigantic drum. The drum is then taken to the workshop where a bed of plaster is prepared for the mosaic, and the drum is unrolled, and the carpet is very, very carefully removed from the face of the mosaic, and you have a mosaic now that is leveled instead of bumped. This mosaic wasn't treated that way. This mosaic was treated, I would say, if you like, in the upside down Sistine Chapel method, where instead of the artist lying on his back and painting the ceiling, here the artist lay on his stomach on a grid-like trolley bed suspended from up on top, working from top down, stone by stone. It was an enormous job and it took a long time, but the finished product, you can't really appreciate it from the video that just does not give justice to the colors and the beauty of this Nile mosaic that is one of the more spectacular mosaics in Tzippori.
Reuven, we have a question from Ruti, one of our viewers, about the artists themselves. Do we know much about, if you look at something of this size, it obviously there must be multiple people working on it, but do we know anything about actually, is there a signature of an artist? Is there a particular style that repeats, or is it different artists for these various mosaics?
Well, the Nile mosaic obviously had a master artist. They would always have assistants. because it's just much too much work for one person to do. But the master artist has his workers, instructs them, checks the size of the stones, makes sure that they put each one in its right position. So it's not a one-man job, but it's certainly overseen, especially a mosaic like this, by one man. When you compare the detail and the resolution of this mosaic to other mosaics, it's just amazing. It's simply amazing.
And are there names known to history? I mean, do we know who these people are?
No, we don't. We know it as the Nile mosaic, but we don't know the name of the actual artist, who sometimes they actually sign their works, like in the synagogue in Beit Alpha, where the artists actually sign their work in mosaic, but usually not. I see a question that where did the stones for the mosaic come from? Mainly locally from Israel. Colored stones. They're not artificially colored. They're actual colors of the stones. In the south of Israel, we have lots of different colored stone. In the north as well. I would imagine perhaps some of it was imported, but most of it we believe is local stone, because we have all the elements of this stone that you see in the mosaics locally available. Not in great quantities, but locally available. So, shall we move on?
Sure, go ahead.
Excellent. So here you see a detail of a hunting scene from the Nile mosaic, and we're now going to move on to the next detail. And you'll notice here, as I said, the artist worked on his stomach. Here you see from the rooftop, and we're jumping to a different neighborhood now, a totally different neighborhood. We're in the Jewish neighborhood, looking down around the surroundings. And in the surroundings, halfway down between the Jewish neighborhood and the Roman neighborhood that we've just come from, is a theater cut into the rock, cut into the side of the hill. And you'll get a indication of that in this slide. Of course, the ancient seats are not the plastic ones up front, and they're not the bright limestone ones that are not aged with age, but some of the original seats you can, I'm sure, make out on the middle section are original seats. And of course, the upper seats were actually once upon a time coated with the proper limestone seats that were taken for recycle. They were valuable limestone seats, and thus after the earthquake, they were probably removed after the earthquake in 365, were probably removed and reused. But this theater, this Roman theater, sometimes wrongly called amphitheater. An amphitheater is an enclosed theater for blood sport. This theater, with its vomitorium and its sections of seats, would seat 4,500 people. And it actually existed in the time when Rabbi Yehuda HaNassi was compiling the Mishna, which just gives an indication of the tolerance and the acceptance of the different practices, because this theater was, of course, mainly for the Romans and the pagans, and it's in between the Jewish quarter and the Roman quarter. We can move to the next slide, and you will see once again the slide of the Jewish quarter, and it's only part of the Jewish quarter that you see here, with the red roof down below, marking a modern monastery that is adjacent to some old Crusader ruins that I'm going to, in a minute, take you down to. But I just wanted to tell you that the tower that we're looking at everything from, or have been looking at everything from, is a Crusader tower first built on top of the ruins of a large Jewish quarter. And we'll visit one of the houses in the Jewish quarter shortly. But let's go and see the Crusader side of things here down the hill, if we can. Here, if we go down the hill to where that red roof is, we come to some Crusader remains that were built on Byzantine remains, where nuns still run a girls' school, Christian girls' school. And here, the Crusaders actually had their church, an enormous church. The Crusader forces were up on top of the hill, on the high part of Tzippori, where we had our observation from. But their church here was down below. And so the churches of the Byzantine period are also down below. Now, why are there churches here? Because it is believed that Joseph actually met Mary here in Tzippori and took her with him back to Nazareth. One of the pilgrims who gives us some historical record of this is the Spanish, I would call a nun or holy woman called Igera. Some people pronounce her name Ithera, who was here in 381 to 383 AD or CE. And she writes volumes. And amongst her writings is her testimony that here in Tzippori, where the Byzantine church was, she actually holds Mary's milking bucket in her hand, Mary's leather milking bucket in her hand. Well, how much dependence one can put on those statements, I don't know, but it certainly seems very likely that if Mary indeed was brought up in Tzippori, that this would have been where Joseph from Nazareth would have met her, wooed her, and taken her to Nazareth. And the reason for that being proposed is that certainly in the time that Jesus was growing up as a youth and Joseph was working as a builder's laborer, a carpenter builder's laborer, there was a lot of work in Tzippori, and Tzippori is a short walk from Nazareth. So it is very likely that even though there is no mention of it in the Gospels at all, Tzippori was certainly a place that may have been visited by Jesus, and was certainly a place that Joseph had some employment. I want to show you the Crusader church now, or what remains of it. It was built on top of the Byzantine structures. And you can see that the building behind it is actually much more modern with the windows and the building. And further up on front is the red roofs that you can't see from here. But it's a triapsial church, 3 apses, and it was built in the form of a cross. Only this wall remains intact because the Mamluks had had the practice of totally destroying Crusader ruins because they believe that anything you left standing of the Crusaders, they would come back to. So that's why this church was very badly destroyed. The next couple of slides will show you another couple of views of angles of this Crusader church. And now we're back up on top, the Jewish quarter and the tower, or called the Taurus in Crusader lingo. That's where we had our view from the area around us. And you're looking directly at, in the foreground, the part of the Jewish quarter that we've been able to excavate it. And if we were able to continue and remove the Taurus, we'd find more because the Jewish quarter continues on the other side of the tower, and it continues with even more luxurious buildings. How do we know it's the Jewish quarter? Let me show you. Next couple of slides, you will see the evidence of this being the area where the Jews stayed on. Apart from the fact that we know that the Jews, to this day, like to live high up for the breeze and for the view, whereas our neighbors live in the sides of the hill for protection, for water pressure, for whatever other reasons. And apparently this was true even in ancient times. Here you see in the Jewish quarter itself, the foundations of many of the homes, and a couple of the slides are going to show you the Jewish ritual bath, the mikveh. And if we move on, we will see a couple of the slides that will show us the Jewish ritual baths. Next slide. And here you see the steps, 3 steps leading down into a fully Persian bath. And here we're on the other side of the tower, and you can see from the ruins down below us, the Jewish quarter continues with much more luxuriously built houses. In fact, I want to take you into one of these houses that has been rebuilt on the outside, but totally original on the inside, and it is a Roman villa, we call it, that we call the House of Dionysus, the god of revelry and wine. And we call it that because he is a main figure in the depictions of the mosaics. He's not the main figure, but he is a main figure in the depictions of the mosaics inside that house. And I want to tell you that this house, remember, it's in the heart of the Jewish quarter, right on top, and it's caused quite a lot of debate and mystery as to who this house actually belonged to. Was it a wealthy pagan Roman who had his villa in the Jewish quarter for the view, or was it a very prominent Jew? Well, let me give you my thoughts on this, but first, let's visit. In this house is a fabulous mosaic carpet, and the the most striking part of this mosaic carpet is the detail that you're seeing in front of you of what many people think may be a depiction of Venus. We call her the Mona Lisa of the Galilee. What is so unusual and beautiful about this mosaic is not just its detail and the blush on her cheeks. That's not the camera trick. That's actually the mosaic that shows the blush on her cheeks. But what is really, for me, amazing about this mosaic is as you walk around the room, from wherever you are, she's looking at you. Whenever you look at her from any angle of the room, even upside down, she's looking at you. How they managed to do that optically, I don't know, but she's referred to as the woman who watches you wherever you are. It is a strikingly beautiful mosaic, and we get a chance to show you. It doesn't come up so beautifully in the video, unfortunately, but we'll show you a little video of this mosaic in a moment. But I want to show you a little bit more. If we can go move on to the next slide, I'll be able to show you this short movie of you can see the detail, a small detail, but the striking detail of the beautiful Mona Lisa of the Galilee that many people today associate with Tzippori totally. The big mosaic, notice the little angles in the corners, the black angles on the white spaces. You'll notice there's one on the left, one on the right, and one in the middle. And these angles mark where the sofa should go, because what you're seeing here is a triclinium seating around this mosaic, with, of course, the beauty of the Mona Lisa of the Galilee being its trademark. Now, the rest of the mosaic, and this is why it's called the Dionysus house, is in the central part of the inner squares, is a depiction of the drinking competition between Hercules and Dionysus, who is under the table. Hercules wins the battle. You can't see the detail too clearly. But one other thing that I want to show you in this house, and it'll give me a little bit of points for the argument I'm going to raise in a moment, is that this house had a room with a seat. Whoa, wait a minute. What are we talking about, a room with a seat? Have a look at the plumbing. Have a look at the smallness of the room. Identify what you saw in Greek, yeti, which actually says health. And you will understand what our sages said when they talked about, Rabbi Yossi actually made a comment of who is a wealthy man, he was asked. And he said, a wealthy man is one who has a house with a room with a seat. Very nicely worded euphemism for a toilet, a sit-down toilet with plumbing. We're talking about, they had this sort of thing even earlier, as some of you know, if you visited the city of David and saw the sit-down toilet from the First Temple period even. But it was very unusual right up until the 1800s to actually be able to have, 1700s at least, to be able to have rooms with plumbing and sit-down toilets. And thus, I'll come back to this argument in a moment. It gives us a little bit of indication, at least to me, of who may have been the owner of this house of Dionysus, as we call it. Now, you're looking at another fabulous mosaic in a synagogue. And this is also going to help me in my argument when I propose what many people believe, but it is very controversial. When you look at this floor of the synagogue, of course, the Jewish emblems, you can see the menorah. We're looking at it from top to bottom here. The menorah, elements from the temple on either side. And in the next couple of slides, you're going to see something that might surprise you in a Jewish synagogue from the 4th, 5th century. The sun god Helios on a quadriga, on a 4-horse drawn chariot, a Greek god, in a Jewish synagogue, surrounded by the months of the year in Hebrew, as you can see, Taleh, Ayal, Ram, and with Hebrew inscriptions, with the corners, with women clothed according to the season that these months fall. In other words, a zodiac in a Jewish synagogue. It was accepted and acceptable because it was mere decoration. And many believe that this idea originated as early as Rabbi Akiva, who apparently was, some people have the theory, was accused of visiting Roman bathhouses. And how can a Jew be in the presence of graven images on the floor and statues in the walls? And according to tradition, his answer was, this is decoration. I do not worship it. I walk upon it. So that's when it became decoration. So this brings me to my proposal that the house that we saw, the Dionysus house, may have belonged to Rabbi Yehuda HaNassi. He was a very wealthy man, and he had a house with a seat. And some comments have it that in his house was a lady whose eyes would follow you wherever you went. But Tzippori is very much worth a visit, very, very much worth a visit for its beautiful mosaics, the ornament of all of the Galilee. We're now going to continue with a quick story. I don't have that much time remaining, but I want to tell you a little bit about what happens from Tzippori in the later period. So we're going to move now from Tzippori. The next slide. Here's a close-up of the zodiac and slides of the showbread in the synagogue itself. Here, Abraham handing over the donkey to be tied while he goes and deals with the sacrifice of Isaac, right behind me, where the golden dome is, by coincidence. And the next slide will take us to a totally different period. You see where Tzippori is on the map in red, and you see where the horns of Hattin are. It's spelt Hattin for some odd reason, but it's actually pronounced Hattin. I talked about the Crusaders at Tzippori, and in fact, they had a Crusader headquarters right on top of the hill on that fortress that later was rebuilt and used as a school. We go fast forward to 1186, 1187, and we talk about the battle at the Horns of Hattin. The protagonists in this battle is, first of all, the chief protagonist on the Crusader side is a very weak Crusader king, knighted because his predecessor got leprosy, and it was a compromise choice. Guy de Lusignan becomes, with a lot of resistance from certain parties, the king of the Crusaders. It is the other protagonists are Raymond of Tripoli, who had a castle in Tiberias and who wanted to be king. He thought he was much more deserving than Guy. And then there were the supporters of Guy, Renaud de Chatillon, who was a sort of a rogue crusader. And then there was Gerard, who was the Templar Grand Master, a real macho man. And these were the main figures on the Crusader side. Renaud de Chatillon, I mentioned, was a little bit of a renegade, a rogue. The Crusaders managed to make a hudna, a peace deal with Saladin, whose rise to power was very quick and very dramatic when he unites the Shia and the Sunni factions of Islam under one banner. He's not that interested in a conflict yet with the Crusaders, and the Crusaders are certainly not interested with a conflict with him. So they establish a hudna, truce, a treaty. Renaud de Chatillon, on the other side of the Jordan River, on the Jordan side of the Jordan River, doesn't abide by this theory. He thinks he is exempt from it. And his main occupation was to hold up and rob Hajj pilgrimages that went across Jordan to Mecca. And when he does so during this treaty, Saladin takes it as a breaking of the treaty and attacks Tiberias. Raymond of Tripoli had deals with Saladin, and here you're seeing the horns of Hattin, and called Hattin because of all the wheat around it. Hattin, wheat in Ivrit, in Hebrew, because surrounded by wheat fields. And we'll flip through the next couple of slides, and I want to show you the protagonists again. You're seeing another view in the next slide of the horns of Hattin. That's one of the horns. The next horn will show you the area around. You're looking at the Golden Heights beyond the Sea of Galilee and the wheat fields in the foreground. And now I want to show you the protagonists. Guy de Lusignan, who was the weak king of the Crusaders. That's an artist's concept from the 1800s. Saladin, who unites the Shia and the Sunni forces. And when Tiberias is attacked, the castle of Raymond of Tripoli, his wife, Eshiva, manages to send out a messenger to Tzippori to ask for help to save her from a fate worse than death. The messenger slips through the Muslim forces purposely because they want this message to reach the Crusaders. It was part of the plan. And when the message arrives, Guy de Lusignan calls a conference with Raymond of Tripoli, with Renaud de Chatillon, and with Gerard. And he says, what are we going to do? We have to fight. And Raymond of Tripoli says, it's my castle. Leave it be. She's my wife, Isheva. Let her be. The others see him as a coward and don't accept his argument that summer is coming to an end and the Arab forces will disperse going back to their villages for agriculture, and all we need to do is to sit tight. If they want to come here and fight, we have a great area to fight in, but certainly not to travel to them for the fight. His argument is lost when Gerard manages to convince Guy that a fight has to happen, and a call goes out, a mobilization goes out to the Crusaders when eventually some 20,000 Crusaders, about 4,000 knights, and the rest sergeants, cannon fodder for the flanks of the horses to protect the flanks of the horses from attack, mobilize in and around Tzippori. And on the night of the 3rd of July, they decide, Guy de Lusignan, despite Renault's objections, decide we're going to fight. Off they go to the horns of Hattin. They're actually going to Tiberias, but their journey along the way is interfered with by Muslim forces on the flanks and at the rear, and the progress is very slow. We're talking about the early morning hours of the 4th of July, when they are, in fact, the night of the 3rd of July, when they find themselves seeking refuge on the horns of Hattin. They wanted to get to the water. You know, the knights can't get off the horses because there's no mounting equipment to get them back up there. And they've got all this heavy armor with them. And they're stuck on the horns of Hattin with the Muslim armies surrounding them, making a lot of noise that night, clanging drums and bells and swishing water about. And the Crusaders are dying of thirst when, in the early hours of the morning, Raymond of Tripoli gets his knights. His sergeants abandon their knights. They run to one of the points of the hill. And Raymond of Tripoli races down towards a small band of Muslim soldiers on the slopes of the horns of Hattin. And, you know, these horses with the armor and lances and everything, unstoppable. But the Muslims don't intend to stop them. They move aside, and 1/4 of the force of the Crusaders is dispatched without a fight. Raymond of Tripoli turns around, looks up and says, oh, there's no point going back up there again. It'll be all over by the time we're there. So off he goes and ends up eventually in Tripoli. 1/4 of the Crusader forces immediately disabled. The rest of the forces are abandoned by their sergeants, and the fight is fast and furious. The Muslims set alight the very dry brush that surrounds the horns of Hattin, and the heat is intense, and they're thirsty even without the heat and the smoke and everything else, and the Crusaders are very badly cut down. There is Saladin's son is actually alongside him in this fight, and he writes a little bit about how he celebrates that the battle is over when his father Saladin says, it's not over until the red tent falls. The red tent, of course, is the tent of the king, Guy de Lusignan. And when that tent falls, it's all over. Saladin brings, first of all, we can move along with the slide, and you'll see how the victors treated their conquered after the conquest. Incidentally, at this battle, the Holy Cross, the one true cross that the Crusaders claimed to have had in their possession and carried in battle, was captured by the Muslims, and according to records, transported upside down to Damascus. Its whereabouts since are unknown. In the next couple of slides, I want to show you some scenes of this scene here depicting after the victory, the dealing with the prisoners. Saladin was considered a gentleman in Crusader terms, because he when he gave his word, he stuck to it. But he was also ruthless with anyone who fought him. And he has more than 1,000 Templar knights, who were the most hardened fighters of the Crusaders, beheaded. But the kings were treated differently. You remember I told you that Renaud de Chatillon, the rogue knight, holds up a Hajj that some believe Saladin's sister was on, but that's open to argument. But he certainly robs them, and Saladin vows to make sure that he executes this Renaud. And in the next slide, you're going to see what happens with the leaders of the rebellion, of the battle, I'm sorry. Saladin sits in judgment while the captured, top rank of the captured are paraded before him for a decision to be made about their future. He hands Guy the pitcher of cold rose water, and take into account nearly for at least 12 hours, if not longer, no water, no coolness, no nothing. And Guy takes a big swig of this cooling water and then hands it over to Renaud de Chatillon. This is when Saladin whips out his sword and slashes at Renaud's arms and says, "I did not offer you a drink." This is very important to understand, that in Bedouin custom, in this custom, if you offer someone hospitality after you've conquered him, especially, you're promising him his life. You're not going to execute him. But he wanted to execute Renaud. And he wanted to make sure that no one understood that he was giving Renaud a drink. It was Guy who gave him the drink from that pitcher. And some say that Saladin himself executed, beheaded Renaud de Chatillon, carrying out his promise that he would execute the person who broke the truce and robbed a Hajj. But the king, Guy, is imprisoned and after a year released for some tribute. Every year, apart from the year of Corona, on the 4th of July, since modern times in Israel, we have a reenactment of interested parties who come and reenact the battle. And here you're seeing a couple of slides of the reenactment. We'll flip to them quickly, but this was the most recent one held, reenacting the battle, not with 20,000 Crusaders, but with a representative small number. Well, Wayne,
Reuven, we're at the top of the hour, so you're going to have to answer real quick on this. Someone asked, Nathaniel asked the question about whether or not there was a corporation or some organization that organized the stones and the mosaics to find them in different parts of the country. Do we know anything about, what that operation looked like?
We don't. We do know individual stories of well-known artists who actually, many of them came from Persia, incidentally, who were mosaic layers. We also know of artists who were brought in from Egypt by the Byzantines to create church mosaics. But we do not know of a co-op that actually supplied the materials to these individual artists. And I think we can only assume that each one looked after his own supply and his own design. And
Reuven, can you just, we got to meet the Mona Lisa of the Galilee, one of the great Saladin, one of the great battles that took place nearby, etc. Can you maybe just say a couple of quick comments about who lives in Tzippori today?
Wonderful.
Can you just tell us a little bit about the yeshuv there and about whether there actually is a functioning synagogue? I feel like I've been to a bar mitzvah there.
Oh yes, oh yes. There are actually two settlements that are partly in the old Tzippori and partly very adjacent to it alongside. One is the moshav Tzippori. Tzippori, after its decline in the 6th, 7th century, it declines totally. And as the War of Independence approaches in 1947, there are a small number, about 5,000 residents of a dilapidated Muslim town who are absolutely hostile. They allow the Arab forces who are fighting against Israel in and take part in the fighting. And as such, in Operation Dekel, Operation Palm, Tzippori is taken by Israel. And many of the Arab residents, some of them go to Nazareth and settle there under Israel today. Others go to Lebanon, and Tzippori then is totally abandoned and becomes, alongside, a moshav from 1948, 1949 onwards. That's a sort of a co-op farming establishment, not as communist or socialist as kibbutz, but certainly part of the way there. And today it's a thriving moshav, Tzippori. Alongside Tzippori is a newish, since the, I think, 70s, gated community of religious Jews, not ultra-Orthodox, just Orthodox religious Jews, Zionist Orthodox religious Jews, who live in a township called Hoshaya. And the township is named for the helper or the completer of Rabbi Yehuda HaNassi's work of the Mishna. Hoshaya actually adds a few things to it, and they established this township. It's a beautiful little township right beside Tzippori, where incidentally one can relive the days of the Mishnah and the Talmud by riding donkeys through the hills all the way to the antiquities of Tzippori. It's a wonderful journey.
Reuven, thanks so much for taking us back in time and connecting it to what people can see today. The comments that we've received throughout the episode, even with the few challenges that we had on the visuals today, people really enjoyed, once again, the ability to visit places that unfortunately at the moment not everybody can actually access. We're looking forward to seeing these in person. And in the meantime, we're looking forward next month. You took us to the Galilee. Today, we're heading down south into the Arava. We're very much looking forward to the change of scenery, particularly since we don't have to deal with the heat quite as much.
Absolutely.
We hope everybody else will be with us this Wednesday. Our next episode coming up is for those of you interested in Israel's new government. We do have a 10,000-foot view of democracy in building democracy on sand, the title of a book by Dr. Ari Carmon, the former head of the Israel Democracy Institute, will be with us and will give us an absolutely insider's perspective and analysis of what it's like to run a democracy without a constitution. Israel's unique parliamentary system. Come join us on Wednesday. Thanks, everyone, for being with us today. Thanks, as always, to Reuven. We want to wish everyone a safe and happy week as we move forward in summer.
Shalom v'lehitraot.